Hello and welcome to Work-Life Balance podcast. I'm your host Jess and this is episode 10. So I want to start off this week by talking about communication because it's part of my confessional this week, and I feel, let's put it this way, I'm a little bit irritated or annoyed by how bad communication has been in general across just everything. It feels like nobody can communicate these days. And I'm not going to sit here and lie. I'm not the best at communicating, and especially since I've had a child. Not that I'm making that her my excuse, but my communication hasn't been as great as it has usually. I take quite a while to get back to messages, and just trying to organise myself has been really, really difficult, and trying to reply to people. I have now started using some sort of planning productivity notebook that I have to try and just improve on my communication, because I've always prided myself on communication, and particularly when I was a nurse, I was religious when it comes to documentation. I just wanted to document every little bit, and especially when I've been in intensive care, you need to document every tiny little bit. But I suppose I should give an example. We needed some people to come around to do some work, and I asked for a quote from someone, and it's been well over a week now, and I sent all the information. I sent pictures so they didn't have to come out. I gave all the dimensions and all the other bits of information that they required. Still heard nothing, and I kept trying to, I guess, I don't know what you guys consider is a suitable amount of time to wait to hear back from someone. And I know with tradespeople that they are so extremely busy that they have a lot to do. But I think when you've been waiting well over a week, almost 2 weeks for a reply, then I think that's actually getting a bit too long to wait for some information. I don't know, what's your opinions? Please let me know what you think. But anyway, I think over a week is far too long to wait for someone to get back to you when it comes to some work that you need quotation from. But I do understand people have a lot on their plates at the moment, and the particular work we're looking to get done is kind of seasonal, so they're probably hugely in demand. Anyway, it's not just when it comes to tradespeople, though. I'm not singling you out. There's all manner of miscommunications going on at the moment. People are, I don't know if it's just British people, but sometimes we don't want to quote unquote bother people. But actually, if you had just said something in the first place, I'm guilty of that, of not saying, okay, is this and this there, or have I misplaced something? Is just broaching people, and sometimes we don't like to do it, but we do have to sort of just get on with that. And talking about communication, I did a TikTok video this week talking about men's health, which I'm going to go into more depth about in a minute, because as much as I really support a lot of what we do with women's health, I also think it's just as important to be talking about men's health. And I sometimes think that doesn't get as much attention as women's health, because, we have a huge platform because we go through so many changes in our life, and probably more frequent changes than men. So we have a period once a month. We might have had at least 1 or 2 pregnancies. I guess that's the average amount of pregnancies a woman has. I don't know the statistics on that. We then go through menopause. So we're going through so many different changes quite quickly and rapidly, whereas for men it's less changes. I think that their health and fitness topics are probably not talked about as much, and perhaps men are more reserved when it comes to talking about men's health and fitness. Because I did ask my partner, I said, would you sit there and talk to another man about health and fitness, or more intimate subjects about how your body's changing? And he said he probably wouldn't talk to someone he didn't know about that. Maybe someone who he's got on with for years and years, whereas I feel quite comfortable talking to another woman who maybe I've known for 1 or 2 sessions, or known them once or twice, and I may be meeting up at like a mum's group saying, how's things going? And then I'll just say, look, I've been really struggling with my body confidence and image. And part of what's really helped me with that has been an app called Peanut, and by no means am I sponsoring them, but that's helped me sort of speak to other like-minded women about different topics to do with bodies and being a mother. So it's good that there are social media platforms out there that will allow you to do that. But anyway, going back to the communication, I go off on a tangent. So I posted this video saying it was basically a picture of Men's Health magazine, and the gentleman on it, I can't remember his name, but he's been in a movie recently with the lady from Euphoria. It will come back to me later. Anyway, he has lots of abs. He's very toned and chiseled. I basically said, this is not realistic of the average man. And so I got a couple of comments saying, what you're talking about, of these images are showing, peak fitness. That's what they're meant to do. And I said, well, it's a Men's Health magazine. I think it should show more realistic, shapes and bodies. It's called Men's Health, not men's peak physical health and fitness. But that was just my opinion, and everyone's entitled to their opinion, which is fine. But the comments were slightly unusual and probably a little bit, I wouldn't say they were as constructive as I would like them to have been. And that just goes back to, and I know you can't stop people either, one, you want people to have their opinion because it's good. You want to engage with different opinions, but you also want some construction around those comments. And I know part of the problem with social media is you also get trolls and people putting hate comments on, and I know that's something I'm going to have to deal with as I sort of delve into this journey of content creation. Anyway, with the men's fitness, I think in the industry it's not as embracive of body positivity as the women's industry has become. That's my personal opinion. Maybe there are sectors, and I don't obviously read male magazines on a regular basis or engage in male media frequently, but that's my opinion. And I spoke to my husband about it, and he does feel that there is that there isn't much of a movement towards looking at realistic male figures. There's always pictures of men who are quite muscly and really, really toned, and for him, as an average man who's working 40 hours a week and now has a family and other home life commitments, just trying to get 3 times exercise in a week is a real struggle. And it's done in the evenings when, we've also got to do cooking and getting the baby to bed and all these other things that need doing, walking the dogs. The people who are in peak fitness doing these movies, they are paid to look good most of the time, and they have access to trainers, they have access to nutritionists, and maybe some of them are going out and doing it all by themselves. But I think from the majority of them who are getting paid an awful lot of money to go into these movies, they have access to resources that can make them look amazing. For a man who's just, in a family life, you don't have access to these resources, and actually you're quite tired by the time you get to actually doing the particular exercise that you need to do to get into this fitness state. And besides, again, I'm not a fitness or health expert by no means. A lot of my knowledge is coming from my nursing, which is sort of not the same as sort of trying to get into physical health. But from what I've been told, to get actual abs, especially the bodybuilders, you need to dehydrate yourself. You need to have sort of minimal body fat, I think. And I suppose if you're sort of on the slimmer, skinnier side with a higher metabolism, that might be easier. But for most men, that isn't. And as you get older, I'm pretty sure your metabolism slows down. I've noticed it immensely, that I have to work so much harder to keep the weight off. I have to make sure that I'm not eating so much. And so I think, it's incredibly difficult. And I think that particularly men's media, women's media still has a little way to go as well, is not portraying that as much as women's media. Every men's health and fitness magazine has a guy with abs who's chiseled. And again, another topic of conversation that we were talking about, my husband pointed out that there was a post once about Jason Momoa, and he had a bit more of a dad bod, and he didn't have his abs at that point. I think he was on the beach somewhere just enjoying himself. And that just re-emphasizes my point that, you know, to keep up that physical health, you need to be constantly training and you need to really, really work at it. He was probably in between movies trying to just relax, enjoy time with the family. And there you go. There's the paparazzi saying, oh, look how much he's let go of himself. He's a man as well who has time, who wants to have time to enjoy himself. And again, also age will start creeping in as well. So I just think it would be better to show more realism in men's magazines as well. That's my point of view anyway. And I think it would, I'm not saying put overweight men on there or put really unhealthy men on there. I'm saying just average men who maybe go to the gym a couple times a week, are in sort of reasonable fitness, have a good health and diet, you know, eating lots of veg and good nutritious amounts of food. But again, I respect other people's opinions on that, and I'm always, you know, quite constructive in my replies as well. So yeah, that was my thoughts and opinions on men's health. I'm going to see if I can drag my husband on here to talk a bit more about it, because I'd love to get the male perspective on men's health and fitness. And my partner has always been very passionate about sort of healthy eating and fitness himself. So that'd be really, really great. But the next thing, so that's my confession. Communication is just not going so well. And I'm not going to lie, I'm part of the problem as well. I need to improve. We can always improve. But it's funny how we all put communication down probably on our CV as a soft skill, but actually the majority of us are getting quite poor at actually communicating. But let me know what you think. You know, hit me up with an email. The details are in the podcast description, or contact me on social media. Do you think communication is getting worse as a whole in society? But yeah, so that's my little rant. But the next thing I want to talk about, and I wanted to dedicate a little bit of time talking, we're flipping quite quickly from men's health to women's health, is talking about how I knew I was pregnant without taking a pregnancy test. Now, this is going to be a little bit of my story and journey about birth control and how I got to sort of natural birth control now. And so since I've been about 16, I think I started on the pill mainly for my periods, and then it was used as a form of birth control. I have been on hormonal birth control for roughly about 10 years. And it was mainly made up of initially the pill, and then I had implants, and I had about 3 implants, and they last about 3 years. So that must have been 3, 6, about 9 years. And then for the last year or two, I tried some different things, because I was then slowly creeping up to thinking about family, and I didn't want to have something that I couldn't easily remove, because then that was during COVID and everything had shut down, and I knew services were going to be really difficult to be able to contact, to be able to remove the actual implant in my arm. And for anyone who doesn't know, I'm sure quite a lot of people do, the implant is like a small rod that goes in your arm. It lasts for 3 years. It releases some hormones that help you prevent pregnancy. So it's a really efficient method of birth control, because you don't have to do anything. If you're sick or on antibiotics, it doesn't make it less effective as far as I'm aware. Please do, check the NHS website for the information on the efficiency. But I never had problems per se, or felt like I was at risk of pregnancy. And I know no birth control, it has a 100% efficiency rate, but it was very efficient for me. The problem with birth control was I wasn't sure whether my moods and the depression I got quite frequently was down to my birth control, and whether that was having an impact. I'm not sure of the studies out there. I'd love to look into it a bit more, maybe talk about it on a podcast at another time. But I think it's probably not researched enough the side effects that actually a lot of these hormonal birth controls have. I'm not sure whether some of my weight gain would have been down to it or whether it was a lifestyle factor. It is really, really difficult because all these factors change so much all the time. But I just knew at that point that I wanted to try and slowly get out of having hormonal birth control. And I knew that during COVID, trying to remove my implant wasn't going to be easy. Now, I managed to get it removed. It was, well, I went to the GP surgery and they removed it for me. When I went, it was a really cold day and it was during one of the lockdowns. And it was probably one of the saddest things I've seen when it came to lockdown. And it just showed you how disorganized everything got. But I was waiting in the car and then I got out to join a queue that was outside. So you had to queue outside rather than inside in the GP surgery because obviously trying not to pass around germs and, you know, the COVID-19 virus and everything. The problem I found with that is people who didn't have cars were waiting in a queue that was getting longer by the minute out in the freezing cold. It was snowing because I think it was about January time. And I felt a bit sorry for them because the queue was made up of a very heavily pregnant woman, a really frail-looking elderly couple, and a couple of other people, maybe with children. I thought, this can't be right that you're making them wait out in the cold in a line. Can they not be in the inside, you know, separated by distance with masks on? And then I went inside and I said, can I use your toilet? I'm really, really desperate. And they let me use the toilet. I said, also, my mum's desperate. Can she use the toilet? No. I was like, she's wearing a mask. And I'm pretty sure COVID was not contracted on your bum. But I know for anyone who's out there listening and say, well, it's another person as risk, etc., etc. I don't think a 2-minute use of the toilet with a mask and keeping your distance from everyone else would have caused an issue for my mum to use the toilet. But I know that's there and done and by, and it's in the past anyway. So that was just a little bit of a surreal, you know, and it was a confusing time. No one knew what they were doing. So I kind of understand why they did those rules. But at the same time, I just think it was a little bit bizarre and they should have probably thought a bit more about the welfare of the people outside in the freezing cold. They did give me the option to sort of be rung in if I'm in a car. But if you're not in a car and you're not driving, then you're sitting out in the freezing cold. So yeah, I had my implant removed and then I decided to try the contraceptive patch. That was the worst mistake I've ever made in my life because it was, I'm not sure what's in the patch again. I feel like it might have no, I don't want to say something incorrect. But anyway, the effects the patch had on me was I had very tender breasts, and I mean really, really tender. I didn't even want anyone near them. It was hard to put clothes on. I became really emotional. Like, I was going for a really tough time at work at that point as well, so that was part of the problem. But the patch just made me even more emotional at that point. So I think part of the problems I had at work was hormonal, and I don't think at that point of time where I was at the workplace they understood that very much. And another problem was it made me hormonal. So I literally was crying at everything. So adverts on the telly, it made me cry, and it wasn't like a crying advert. So I decided I need to come off this thing. It's horrible. And also with the patch, there would be like, you know, fluff clinging to the sticker all the time, and it would just get all manky. I can't remember how often I had to change it. It was either, can't remember if it was once a day or once a week, but yeah, it'll tell you on the website, on the NHS website. But yeah, lots of fur clung to it, or fur, you know, cloth from your jumpers and whatever. And yeah, it left a little bit of a mark as well. So I wasn't comfortable with that. I then went back on the pill, but after a while I decided actually I need to come off that. And then that got to the end of the time where I was working in a place where I was struggling quite a lot, and there was huge demand on studying and also a lot of practical work that needed a lot of energy and time. So I was going through quite an emotional period already, struggling with that workplace. but to add on the hormonal birth control, which just added to all my hormones, ramping up in me. And I'm going to say another thing, and it's really difficult for me to talk about, but I actually got a bit, how to say, so at that point my sister had a child, and I felt a bit jealous because I think at that point it triggered something in me that I wanted a child. And because she is younger than me, and had been in the relationship less time than I had been with my husband, who I've been with for over 10 years. I was married to him for a couple of years. I got a bit jealous, and I'm admit, because I'm an honest person, I like to come out with my feelings, and I think it's important to acknowledge it. Okay, we can get jealous, we are human beings, but it's how we deal with those. And I didn't deal with it very well, so I ended up in quite a lot of arguments with my husband because I at that point I was thinking I really want a child. So that was one of the reasons I ended up quitting the job I was in, because one, it was really strenuous. I was traveling, our house sale fell through, so we couldn't relocate to where I was going to take this job. And actually, by the end of it, looking back, it probably wasn't for me anyway, because the amount of stress it would have entailed, the amount of studying, and it would have just been continuous. And to start a family around that would have been horrendous, because I would have just been an absolute wreck by the end of it. So then it came to, at that point, I ended that job. And at the same time, I decided to come off hormonal birth control, because I just said, that's it. I've had enough. I need to have a total reset and just rethink my life through. But that jealousy and that, wanting for a child remained. And that was still during sort of COVID, coming into the year. And so I decided to come off hormonal birth control, and we just use sort of barrier methods. But around that time, I started researching a bit more about, options for natural birth control. And I just started typing it in. And then it came up with natural birth control. And then I started looking more and more, and actually realised that with natural birth control, you can chart your cycles, find out a lot more about your body, and actually find out, I actually found out, and I was so embarrassed to not know this, but you are not, you can't get pregnant every day of the month, which was the whole reason I had been on birth control since the day dot, basically, is because I thought every day I was at risk of getting pregnant, which actually is not the case. Now, I can understand probably from a GP perspective or a health practitioner's perspective, they're probably not always keen to promote natural birth control to women, because to actually use it, you need to chart religiously and understand your body and really be very responsible with the method, because you can very quickly get pregnant if you don't follow the rules. So with natural birth control, there are several methods with rules that are outlined as to what you can do and when you can do it. So for example, there's a method called taking charge of your fertility, which is what I'm following, and it's by a lady who is considered to be the a leading lady in natural birth control and fertility, and who has written huge amounts about it and has written a method. But there are several methods, and some of them have more religious aspects to it and others don't so much. But the principle is, and again, when I say this, I'm not a fertility, so it's also called fertility awareness / natural birth control. So I was confused by the two terms, but they're kind of sort of interchangeable. Again, I'm not a practitioner in these arts. I just have gained a lot of knowledge from having practiced it for so long. So I started looking into charting my cycles, and from it I just learned so much about my body. Like, I could tell from the chart, and this was pre-pregnancy, because things sort of change a bit and go a bit wacky after pregnancy. I literally could tell when my period was going to come, because my temperature would drop. So I use a method called, I use a symptothermal method, which means that you have to, and again, for a lot of ladies out there who are already doing this, you'll have a great understanding of what I'm talking about. But for the average listener, I take my temperature every morning at resting temperature, which you can then plot on the chart. So pre-ovulation, your temperatures will be lower, and then after you ovulate, they will come up again until your period arrives. Now, what would happen for me is probably the day of my period, or literally the day before, my temperatures would drop, which means I'm just about to get my period. And I found that out from charting, and I would never have known that before. And just going back a step, that was another reason why I came off birth control, because I was like, I haven't had a period for years, and this just feels really, really weird that I haven't. And also, if I want any chance to have a baby, which me and my husband were starting to talk about, I need to come off birth control and have that completely out of my system. Because we all know, for some women, you come off birth control, you probably can get pregnant within 2 weeks. But for other women, it can take months and months. And I knew actually that I probably had an inkling that I knew that I wasn't going to be one of those women that would take months and months. But you never know. Anyway, I also would get headaches before my periods as well. Literally a headache the day before. And that's because I charted so many cycles. So by the time I got to 5 cycles, literally the pattern was, and because I don't have any fertility problems, I don't have endometriosis or PCOS that affects me, I just literally have the most average cycle. And this is pre-baby, because again, it goes out of whack after baby. I literally have the most normal cycles ever. It was like 27 days perfect, and that's another misconception, that every woman has like a perfect 28-day cycle, which is not the case. And I think a lot of health practitioners, even GPs, don't have that full understanding that a woman's cycle is different. But anyway, my cycles were virtually perfect, 27 days, ovulation virtually in the middle of that cycle. And again, everyone believes that. A lot of people believe that you ovulate on day 14. That's not always true. Every time I get sick, my ovulation is delayed at least by a couple of days, which is why people end up getting pregnant sometimes on this method. But anyway, I would get headaches just before my period, and I also would see this temperature drop. So when the cycle that I got pregnant, obviously I ovulated, and then you go into what you call that 2-week wait. And a lot of women will know what a 2-week wait is. And so you wait 2 weeks to find out whether you're pregnant, because you've got to let implantation happen, etc., etc. So, when the egg implants into the uterus, or the fertilized egg, should I say, or there's a term for it. I'm not putting all the terms out properly. Again, like I said, I'm not a practitioner, but I would love to become one at some point in the future. So I went into the 2-week wait. And with your temperatures, when you're I still kept taking my temperatures, and they say I think after so many temperatures, if your temperature remains high, the likelihood that you're pregnant is quite high, because your temperature normally does come back down again before your periods or before your cycle starts again. So I had several high temperatures, and they said, probably if your temperatures, because my temperatures had always stayed high up into a certain day, I think it was always, I had 12 high temperatures before it came back down before my period. So I got to the 12th temperature, and then I thought, if my temperature doesn't come down the next day, I must be pregnant. And so the next day I got up, I went to bed so nervous, thinking, oh my God, I wonder what's going on. And so I waited, and then the next day my temperature hadn't come down, and I thought, I must be pregnant, because I normally have 12 high temperatures. And so the next day I woke up and the temperature was high, and I thought, I will test. Now, you then go into this other thing of DPO, so days post ovulation, which a lot of women, when they're trying to get pregnant, they're literally counting those days. And for most, between the 12 to 14 days, you're probably going to see a positive, or at least a very faint positive. Not all women, sometimes it takes even longer to get it, and some ladies get it even earlier. So I had tested a couple times coming up to there, and they were all negative, and I thought, actually it's very, very early. And so I did also test on day 13, and I had not a very faint line, but a faintish line, and I knew it was positive. But that, coupled with the fact that my temperatures hadn't come down, and the other thing was, which was interesting, is I didn't get the headaches, and I normally get headaches before I have a period. So, in a nutshell, charting has just taught me so much about my body. It's taught me when I'm going to ovulate. It's taught me, you know, whenever I've been ill, my temperatures have gone up, and I know probably likely my ovulation is going to be delayed. But, you know, I've learned so much about it, and I do feel healthier. But I can't attribute it completely to being on natural birth control, because I have eliminated the stressful job that I have found difficult. Although I have stresses being a mother, it's actually an absolute delight when the stresses are gone down. But yeah, I have found that charting has been an absolute godsend, and I've absolutely loved it. So ladies, if you really want to try doing natural birth control, the best advice I can give is, you know, be really religious with the rules of whatever method you go with, because there are quite a few methods. And if you need to, get in an instructor. So there are so many people out there who can instruct you through the methods, and be extra cautious with it, okay? Because it is easy to get pregnant on it, but it's also easy to avoid pregnancy and still be able to have some freedom with it. Obviously, it's a choice whether you abstain during your fertile period or whether you sort of have protected sex. It's up to you. And again, I still would advocate, if you're sort of not got a regular partner and you're using natural birth control, I probably still would advocate using protection anyway, because of STIs and things. But that was my story, how I knew I was pregnant before I did a test. I hope that's been an interesting discussion, and thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you have a good week.